As with the keel and many other parts of Jinnie, the transom is looking tired. This might be a whole new component, but we should be able to integrate some of the old transom. The remit with which we have to restore Jinnie means we have to restore and rebuild within the footprint of the boat. Yes, this is unusual, but it makes for a greater understanding of the building process, and it allows our apprentices hands-on experience of a complete restoration. Anyway, who doesn't like a challenge? Before we even start thinking about taking out the transom, we need to make an exact pattern of it so we have something concrete to work from. There's also a split all the way across the transom which we will temporarily repair with a doubler before removing it. We also need a guide from which we can create the beveled edges of Jinnie's transom. Remember, we are not building the boat from scratch, so a lot of reverse engineering is called for. To get the transom out, we'll have to spring several of the aft planks, being careful to preserve those and at the same time the transom. To make the pattern, I've divided up the transom into 12 equal segments. I've also added the center line and marked off the same points where they meet the center line. -1 to 0 represents the area under an approximate waterline, and 0 to 10 represents everything above that. The meat above the 10 mark is a separate job, which we'll find out about later on. What's imperative is that we make exact reference points from which we can create the rolling bevel of Jinnie's transom. The angles at which the aft planks meet the transom edges are constantly changing as we move from the top to bottom, so we need to be precise. With all the reference points marked up, we can then convert these points to a plywood template copy of the outer transom shape. We need to figure out what the angles are between the inner and outer edges of the transom. We'll have to pick up the bevels from the outside and follow those toward the outer edges on the inside of the transom. To do this, we'll also have to mark up the mirror of this pattern on the other side once we get this out. We can then make a start at creating the many bevel measurements for Jinnie's transom. There's quite a few screws and nails to release before we can spring the boards out and release it. We also have to release the port and starboard doublers that are both partly holding the transom in from the inside.
Ultimately, I want to release this transom, this flat piece at the back here, out from the boat. To do that, there's quite a lot of other stuff that's got to be released. Inside, we've got some doublers. I've released them with these nails. There's a lot of fixings coming through the transom to the doubler, but some of the planks are also screwed up here. And that's what I've just been removing, these screws out of the doubler as well.
I just want to show you some of the stuff that's coming out.
These are copper nails that are coming through from the outside of the transom, and they've been roved over on these roves. I'm not going to touch that because it's still quite hot. To get those nails out, we've got to grind off the bit that's been belled over, the copper that's belled over. So that's what I've been doing, grinding them off. I'm not sure that you'll be able to see on camera, but there's just the sign in the top of that one. You can just see the centre. It looks a bit like a sort of a dartboard, and that centre is the centre of the nail coming through the rove, and that's the bit I want to see like that. Now I should be able to punch that back and the rove will fall off and the nail will go on the outside.
A rove is a small dished or conical copper washer used with a copper nail to form a durable, corrosion-resistant rivet. Its most common use was for building clinker boats just like Jinnie.
All these fastenings down here are all copper. That's because they're resilient more to the salt water and the elements than things like a steel nail or an iron nail. If you go back to the times of Viking ships, they're all iron nails. But these are much more resilient, being copper, to those sort of water. We also use silicon bronze screws, which I've got here. These are some of the ones we've been taking out. We have to watch about mixing different types of metal, especially when they're in the water, because we get a thing called electrolysis happening. So if we were to use the complete opposite to copper on what they call the galvanic stage, we would get a electric current, and one of the softer metals would eat away very quickly. We want to stop that, obviously, with our fastenings and all our metal that's holding our boat together, because otherwise it's all going to fall apart. So we try and use very similar metals. So all of the screws on here are silicon bronze, because in the galvanic series they're very close to copper nails.
Let's get the rest of these nails out. We'll also take out the rest of the screws holding the transom in on the hood end. The hood end is the name for the end of a plank where it fastens into the transom, or the stem for that matter. With all the nails and screws out, we can then start to prise the planks away from the transom and spring them back with wooden chocks.
Voila! Out she comes. Well, that's the doubler that was put on there, usually put on for having extra fastenings through, give a bigger landing for the end where the planks come at the transom. That is the port one. That's a grown one that's been grown in the shape. It's been taken out of a piece of tree where a branch has come out of the main trunk or something similar. I'm not sure whether we'll get another one to go back like that, but we might do it in parts to keep the strain and the structure good, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
We'll be making the new doublers later, along with all the frames using half lap joints. These will be glued together with epoxy and colloidal silica to give us the extra strength we need. Right, the moment has come, probably the first time this has been out in 80 years. Voila!
There's no going back now.
Okay, let's take a closer look at this and make a plan. That went really well. It's come out really easy actually. It sort of sprung, the planks are sprung nicely away, and we've managed to just wriggle that out there nicely. You can see I've put this doubler on here. The reason it is this transom is in two parts. So there's quite a bit of movement between here. You can see I can put my finger in here, and I had to sort of measure it out to make sure we got the right distances on our water lines. This is where our grid has helped us. So I've screwed this piece on before I took it out just to make sure that it's held, and it's held in the right position when we got it all out, so it's all one. You can see the condition is not great. The top part, this half, is a lot better than the bit that was below the waterline. This bit's really deteriorated. The steel fastenings through here, I suspect this is oak, this bottom piece, and they've obviously worked well with the iron fastenings, and the oak have worked together nicely to create these sort of pockets of rust and decay. But you know, we've managed to preserve the shape, we've preserved the integrity of it as we've got it out, and we've now got it here so we can start taking our measurements and our bevels off it. And beside it, we've got the new one that we've glued up, and we've also got the pattern cramped on there at the moment onto our grid. So old one here, what we hope will be the new one will be there. Before we start taking our rolling bevel measurements, we need to mark up the inside of the transom with the grid pattern we made before. These need to line up with the marks we made on the outside of the transom.
So what I'm doing now is transponding the grid that we've got on the other face of this ply template onto this side. So it becomes the inside rather than the outside. By using the bevel gauge, we're actually measuring the angle physically rather than numerically. So rather than being given an angle, we've got to somehow do it with a protractor and work out the angle. We're actually measuring things physically, measuring between two lines that are physically drawn. So the angle is there in front of you, you're just moving it from one position to another. We're actually just physically measuring the bevel as a physical object rather than trying to measure an angle. We're not recreating the wheel by doing that, we're just actually doing something that's been done for years and years and years. It is very easy to see a physical object and measure it rather than trying to numerically work it out. All of these methods that we're using will have been used even on things like the Viking ships. They would have been measuring angles physically, not numerically.
We need several bevels from both sides of Jinnie to account for her rolling bevel. The bevel is constantly changing, so we have to be accurate with the bevels we make and how we record them. My bevel board is really handy for this. The board itself is split into two equal halves, representing port and starboard sides of the transom. The width of each side is the same width as the transom itself. If we didn't have a constant width measurement, the resulting bevels would be wrong. We need a fixed relationship between the constant width and the ever-changing bevel of Jinnie's transom. We can record both port and starboard bevels as we move up and down the waterline using the template marks we made. We then transfer the bevel distances onto the new transom's inner edge. That tells us how much meat we'll have to take off toward the outer edge and the outside of the transom. I can't give you the average angle because the angle constantly changes to fit the curve of the hull and planks where they join the transom. We'll have to adapt the bevel by hand as we fare our way around. Let's take a bevel as an example. This takes a bit of practice, but you just have to throw yourself into it. Practice makes perfect. Jamie is around in a bit, so I'll show him how to do it too. With the bevel lined up on a line from our grid pattern, we adjust the bevel to the bevel that we've got on the transom. So we're setting it up down here. So now we've got the bevel down on and the angle that we need. So this is the extra amount that we're going to have to come out from the outside to the inside of the transom. Having locked off the bevel, hold the bevel handle parallel to the bevel board and mark the bevel angle. Repeat this process at every point of our grid marks on the transom and add them to the bevel board. Don't forget to label them as you go. So I've taken all my bevels for the starboard side, all the way from 8 down to the waterline, down to below waterline, so that's -1. So I can now take all those measurements and transfer them onto the starboard side of my new transom. I'll do the same for the port side. I'll take all the angles for the port side as well and do the same on this side of the bevel board to get those measurements just in case there's any variation on the two sides. Using a combination square, run a straight line under each bevel from the edge of the board to the centre. Repeat this process for every bevel made on both port and starboard sides of the transom. Again, really important you label as you go to avoid getting into any pickles. Using a compass, copy the distance from where the bevel meets the middle of the bevel board and the line we drew below it. This distance represents how much meat we are removing from the outside of the transom towards the inside. Jamie's just appeared. Let's see what he makes of beveling. I've run through the whole process with him already and I've shown him a couple of example bevels. Let's give him a go. Do you want to have a go at doing one?
Yep.
Right, pick a number.
2.
All right, so you've got to pick up 2 on here.
Yep.
You really ought to check when you tighten them up because sometimes they pull up just to make sure you are on the mark.
Yep.
So now you can draw that on there. And now you've got a square across. Now pick up your distance. That's our angle. That distance represents how much we're swelling from the outside of the transom to the inside. So that will give us our mark there.
Well, that was easier than I thought it was going to be. It all makes sense to me now.
There we go. So we'll do that process on every line all the way round, and that will give us that inside edge. Happy with that?
Yep. Lovely.
The benefit of a bevel board. See you in the next episode where we'll be fairing the transom down and hopefully getting it back in without a hitch.